Okay, it's getting there. Yay. Okay, we're live on the internet. We made it in. So woohoo. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to today's Eat and Greet. And hopefully in the next hour or so, we give you something that was worth you showing up. I'm really happy to be here. We were just chatting a little bit before, and we're both really happy that Jupiter is out of retrograde, like a shift in the force. So to take us through the journey of what's been happening while Jupiter was retrograde and what we can do with it now that it's direct, I've invited over Miss Christina Caudill. So thank you so much for coming over, Christina.
Hi, thank you so much for having me, Stormie. I'm super excited and honored to be your guest this morning, which I guess is morning and on your side of the country. For me, it's just lunchtime. But I'm so excited about Jupiter finally going direct this year, and I can't wait to talk about it with you.
Oh man, yeah. It's so funny because it's so quiet. You know, it's such a quiet, subtle shift, but it is there. At least that's my experience of it. And I was like, just this weekend, I was all, oh, I sense a shift in the force. It's going to be all right coming forward for sure. So we'll talk about that in just a second. A little bit of housekeeping, you guys. It is a loaded week of Eat and Greets. There are people everywhere at the Cyber House, so make sure you're checking it out. And if you missed anything, you can always go back to the Eat and Greet playlist as well. And the autumn equinox gifts are still up, as many as are available. And it's okay if you don't get one of those, or if you're looking for something sooner, the regular scheduling list is open as well. So Christina, man, I see you got some snacks.
I am starving. I'm sorry. I was like waiting to eat now. And my husband made me, I'll show you. My husband made me this lovely salmon and rice because I had to have something that, I could use a fork and knife with.
Yeah.
And a lovely salad. Normally I'm like eating with my hands, I realized. I was like, oh my God, I need something that I look.
You're like, I'm such a savage. I'm going to have to use cutlery today.
Yeah, so look professional. But I love this idea. I love this whole chat and chew, eat and greet. I think it's wonderful. And I promised you, because it was Jupiter, I would have an actual meal.
Yes. Well, and I love it now because it's funny because it's like now as these are kind of catching on and people are watching, they're like, oh my God, I better really bring some food. This girl's a Taurus. Like I better really bring some food. I'm like, that's right.
My husband was like, what about crab legs? I'm like, are you kidding me? I'd be too distracted to talk about astrology.
Oh my gosh. And the drippings and just all of it. Yes. All right. Well, you chew for a minute and I'll get us introed here. Perfect. So Jupiter went retrograde in May of this year. And Jupiter retrogrades for 4 months every year. And it's interesting because I can't remember who was here was talking about it, but we were talking about how the outer planets really, they kind of have this below the surface kind of vibe. So even when they're out of retrograde, they're not that far out of retrograde. So they don't dip that far in and out, unlike when we see Mercury or Venus and Mars, and it is absolute, like, that something has just happened. So with these other planets that are a little bit further from the sun, they kind of just are below the level of consciousness just a little bit. So we kind of have this up and down motion where it's subtle in those shifts. So Jupiter goes retrograde for 4 months every year. And, it's not really that uncommon or anything like that. But when it does go retrograde, what happens is the things that Jupiter is about are the things we start to re-look over. And we'll look over them in the sign that they're in. So Jupiter, philosophy, religion, my beliefs, faith, legal things, ethical things, moral things, higher education, travel, international things, all of these things become a focus for us as Jupiter retrogrades. Now, if you've got your chart, Jupiter began as retrograde May 14th at 27 degrees of Capricorn. And as he came out of retrograde on the 12th, it was at 17 degrees of Capricorn. So you can kind of grab your chart and look and see what was that motion and that movement looking like in your chart and identify the housing area that it was happening in and kind of get a better idea. And it's kind of interesting too, if we think about just the astronomy of Jupiter and his placement and how the retrograde happens. Jupiter, because it's further out from the Earth and the sun, it's like when he does retrograde, he has to get like midway through his retrograde to even be close enough to us on the Earth for us to go, oh, something's happened, you know? So as he went retrograde in May, if you were like, yeah, whatever, nothing really changed, and we got to about June, July, and you were like, hold on, what happened? Something happened, right? That's okay. That's kind of that astronomical movement that happens. He gets halfway through that retrograde and then it's close enough, and not even as close as like Mars is right now, but we start to have a sense, and then he goes out of retrograde and we'll move back into superior positioning. So it really is a very subtle kind of energy for sure. So that's it. I've ranted about Jupiter retrograde, Christina.
Well, thank you so much for that. And, you know, Jupiter in Capricorn is certainly something, you know, we've really had to deal with this year. Last year, we were kind of riding high with Jupiter being in Sagittarius, its home sign. A lot of people, whether they did it consciously or unconsciously, like kind of took advantage of that. I mean, I went on 3 vacations last year. I mean, I wasn't expecting overseas too. And I hadn't been on an overseas vacation in like 10 or 12 years, like almost a Jupiter cycle, you know? And I go in 3 in 1 year. And so
you're like, I got to get these in.
You're right. There's part of me that was just like, part of me couldn't stop myself, number one. And another was, I was thinking next year, 2020, even though we didn't know exactly how it was going to show up. I mean, I just had a sense, you know, the Saturn Pluto conjunction in Capricorn with Jupiter in Capricorn. I sensed, now my thought was that we would have like some authoritarianism that wouldn't allow us to leave. And in some sense, in some ways that did happen when it was more, you know, from the point of view of the pandemic, but that caused, you know, you know, we actually cannot, like the governments have said, we cannot, like for Americans, we can't even go to Europe right now, or Europe has said they don't want Americans there because
like,
how
don't come here.
we handled the pandemic. And, you know, the other thing that's happening with that is because we also have the nodes in Gemini and Sagittarius, which we can also talk about. And so, you know, Jupiter in Capricorn this year has a whole different sense as it had last year, because in Sagittarius, it's a fire sign. Things were kind of over the top. And usually we see this switch from Jupiter in Sagittarius to Jupiter in Capricorn being some kind of a correction, right? Because there's an overdoing things, like doing things sloppily, not having the appropriate boundaries, not having appropriate sense of like, you know, whether things are too much. And then in Capricorn, we get hit with the reality. And even though Jupiter is still Jupiter, Jupiter still wants to expand and still wants to bring blessings and hope and optimism, you know, it just is not as comfortable in the sign of Capricorn. It's not as free to give us all those blessings in that way. Like, and maybe we have to work for it. We have to be more patient. You know, there's that sort of Saturnian vibe there with Jupiter, which I felt, and myself being like, you know, major Capricornian, Sun ascendant and Mercury in Capricorn. And, you know, the Jupiter retrograde, I felt like you're kind of back on your, anytime the planet goes retrograde, I feel like you're kind of back on your heels with it. You know, you're not fully able to feel like you're co-creating with that planet. And because you're not usually getting all the juice, whatever, from that planet. And just like what you were saying, you know, the personal planets, Venus, Mars, and Mercury, when they go retrograde, we feel it personally. It affects our immediate environment, our immediate, you know, life, and we can tend to really struggle with that, you know, I guess depending on our natal chart, really, but it's more immediate for us. Yeah. Something like the social planets like Saturn and Jupiter, and then of course the outer planets beyond them. With Saturn and Jupiter, a lot of times we tend to see it because they're about the social planets, you know, the social collective. It also, of course, they all affect our ourselves personally, but it may be more in a sense of, how big can I go? How big can I really expand in my goals and my aspirations? And, we might not feel like we've had fully, our ability to spread our wings kind of since Jupiter went retrograde in some ways. And so now with Jupiter, Jupiter is stationing or had stationed direct, these past few days. So it's going to take some time for Jupiter to, gain in speed. But that sense of forward motion should hopefully likely help us to feel more aligned with expressing these Jupiterian qualities in our life. Like what we've been working toward, they can hopefully start to show some results, show some, even if it's, we're still in sort of like Virgo season. Sometimes it's smaller results that can really add up. So we have faith that they can add up. And, but overall, Jupiter is still Jupiter. No matter what Jupiter is doing, it is the planet of expansion, hope, optimism, the future, justice, belief, like you said, which is huge right now. We
So
can't
big.
have a discussion about Jupiter with like, what do you believe? And that it so creates our reality, which ultimately, Capricorn is nothing if not the sign of reality, what we consider to be real in our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and we've had this dance with Jupiter coming into contact with both Pluto, sextiling Neptune. So there has been really this dance of the in-between, but also transformation, I think. And almost like in some ways having it be in Capricorn really kind of feels like a karma moment to me as well. Like we've got to, like you said, go back, kind of backpedal and look, have we, even at a social level, have we been sloppy? But then when we pull that down to our personal lives, I think as Jupiter is direct now, you maybe get to see what you were working on, even if you didn't know you were working on it. Like what did you go back to? And now you're getting a second chance to actually expand that thing forward, because you did have to go back and kind of tidy that thing a little bit, see the wisdom of what was already there, but adjust. It like couldn't go farther. It couldn't get bigger without some adjustments and things like that.
Yeah.
So
one thing I'm noticing is it's like, because obviously we've all gotten some kind of reality check when it comes to our, our sense of like how long we're going to live, or how can we live in a world that, this new world or this big threat, and in some ways it's gotten kind of, dark, but it's given us a reality check. And one thing I that kind of comes to mind is, like in the past couple of years, I've been noticing so many people just go on Instagram and they post some kind of quote that's like uplifting for a minute, and then they get all these followers, and then they think, oh, wow, I'm onto something here, so let me just keep posting uplifting stuff. But is it grounded in anything? This is one of the reasons why really myself personally, I really like a lot of Jungian psychology, or just like, depth psychology in general, because it's grounded in research and in lived experience. Because now we're finding that you can't just have live your life by memes alone, whether they're astrology memes or inspiring memes. And, what is the real rigorous, depth that really gives you a sense of true optimism? Is it even appropriate to be optimistic at a time like this? And if so, or if not, then why? Because we can really, one of the things I think it was Dennis Harness, a Vedic astrologer, said is like, he doesn't want to be cheerleading his clients off a cliff, right?
Right.
There is
love
time.
you to death.
Right. There's times to be serious and to assess, where we're really at. And I think from there, when you can actually do hit rock bottom, sometimes you can feel the bottom. And then from there, have a real sense of where your optimism can come from and what it takes to really to nurture that, not only to kindle it in the moment, but to cultivate it over time. Yeah. And earlier this year, I did a course with Shireen Vismaya on Pluto. And I was realizing, we can't do Pluto without doing Jupiter this year. And same with Jupiter. You can't do Jupiter without Pluto. They've been in a dance all year, even, and then, of course, Saturn has been in there in the mix. But for most of the year, those two have been so close together, and they're going to, come together another time. And it's just really, even though they can seem very different, Pluto is the darkness, it's our shadow, but ultimately it's, power and, empowerment and disempowerment. And Pluto expands what it touches, like for better or for worse, but ultimately it is the planet of optimism, like the light at the end of the tunnel. So it's interesting to see these two come into a dance, go retrograde and direct, and, and interact with other planets. But ultimately it's almost kind of like, the god of, the light and the prince of darkness, like in a dance in Capricorn's realm all year.
Yeah, they're meeting up, and there's a lot of wisdom that comes from them dancing together. That's really, as we were even getting ready for 2020 and I was doing the yearly videos, I just have this running theme of, yes, everything is about to change. It has to, it's time, we're up for it. But it's not done alone. Like Saturn and Pluto weren't just sent in there on their own to like tear it down and put something else over here. There is Jupiter is in there, and he brings a genuine wisdom, that I think is needed to say, yeah, this makes sense still, but this doesn't make sense over here. And more than anything, we have to do exactly what you were talking about, which is say, well, why? Why do I believe this? Why do I do this? Why do we do this way? And it's just this questioning. And you were talking a little bit about the nodes, and that is a big exploration, I think, that brings this question to the table. Why do we do this? And maybe we need to learn another way. Maybe we didn't have enough information at the time, and we can learn in that Gemini node something else to detach from maybe what was not the best way, which that's just life, right? Like you'll know better, you do better. But in the span of a big old structure, whether it be our lives or it be at a global level, it's 2020. We have a lot more resources. There's a lot more expanded, intuitive, open to that kind of living people, I think, motoring around right now. So that's of course going to change the way that we do things. So this Jupiter wisdom, I think, has been fabulous. And he's got a dance right there next to Pluto to be like, Pluto, guess what? Don't burn the entire hut down. Let's just take down the ones that are not working.
Yeah. And I love what you said, if only we could all just commit to, when I know better, I'll do better, because that, is, I think that's an intention that we all, hold. But I think this year it's so important because the thing with the Pluto is it's unearthing all that we've been living, that we've been living our lives around that we haven't even known, right? I think ultimately the Pluto and the Jupiter coming together, like to realize like this country, America, was built on racism, was built on slavery, actually. Like, and to, we might have heard that before and said, yes, okay, yeah, okay, that's our ancient history. But to see how now it's, we're experiencing the karma of that, especially coming toward the Pluto return coming up pretty soon in a couple, I think, early 2022, or is it
2 years, about 2 years.
And we're having to face the very roots of this country and things that we've like built on top of it, but now it's like being exposed. And so now that we know better, we have to do better. But the more things are exposed, the more people can really be in denial. So there's that, I think it's like all these planets being at the end of Capricorn. When change is inevitable, you will also inevitably have those clinging to the old way. But it does at least feel like that the movement is not stopping, the movement toward progress and accepting what needs to be changed in society. And it can be having to go back, and make peace with the past, or restore what's been broken, repair that which has been broken.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that Jupiter, gives us that, especially, will open doorways and pathways for allowing, repairs to be made. And, we can, these days, the big news, everyone is talking about, Mars retrograde. And yes, it can be a very volatile time. Now Jupiter can also expand everything, expand all the fire like that too, like on the West Coast, we may even, see, it seems like that's not stopping anytime soon. But also, the hope, the optimism, the wisdom from this time, it can maybe start to coalesce. Like we've been working on things, and maybe our unconscious may have just been working on our belief systems. And now that Jupiter is stationing direct, we can collectively start to, something has actually been integrated in our beliefs collectively.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's interesting looking at the mythology of it. Saturn, Jupiter, and Pluto are Saturn's kids, and he just didn't eat Jupiter. So, well, that's good luck on him. But it's interesting because there's a comment down here too, talking about well before slavery. We go all the way back to the natives that were here. And it's like at this point, as we watch these guys come together, it's father and children together. And we are a young country. We are a very young country. We have done a lot wrong. We have done a lot right. And so as we come to this return, all of these things, like you said, become exposed so that we can go back over them and look at where we can get back on track. But I think it's interesting to be doing that in the parent-child dynamic. And I think truly, I don't know about anybody else's experiences, but as everybody's stay at home has happened in our own lives, I think so many people have got to come back to their own parent-child dynamics, right? Even it down to, why do I do this in my own house, right? Where did that belief come from? It's very much so back to the why, but it's the parent-child dynamic. In order for us to mature, we got to go back. So it's kind of a neat deal.
Yeah. And so many, parents having to teach their kids at home. And that is, maybe that's also part of the Jupiter's a teacher also. And the parents being like, oh my God, I'm so sorry I ever complained about my child's teacher, because they're realizing how hard it is to actually get kids to focus and to learn. It's a big job. I've known teachers who have, have had to deal with these helicopter parents and things like that, and of my generation of the Pluto and Libras, who really want to protect their kids. And they, they'll in no time, they'll just, call and complain about a teacher if the teacher did something that the child didn't like, and so it had been becoming, and I've been hearing more and more of this, that had started to becoming too much of a problem, because then the children, the teacher can't really have any kind of authority in their own classroom and things. But now that parents have to actually see what it is, to deal with children all day, it's hopefully giving them a different perspective. And I think Jupiter is about that perspective.
Sure. Well,
and now that kids are going back to school in some areas, hopefully the parents have had that experience that Jupiter retrograde Pluto
sure. A little gratitude.
Yeah, some of them have been saying it's been hell teaching their children at home, because then they don't go anywhere. They're at home all day.
Yeah, which is interesting too, because in Capricorn, that just pull yourself up by your bootstraps. This is the job. This is what we do. We do it because this is what we do. And it's like, oh man, this has been a time to refocus, to be like, nah, we had these kids. We agreed to these marriages. We agreed to these relationships. And those are actually the primary job. The work is a bonus. But how do you do that if that has not been your way of living for a long time, to restructure even mentally, psychologically, emotionally, to really engaging the people in our lives, really engaging our pets, right? This has been something I've been watching just even in my neighborhood, and having some conversations with my neighbors who are lovely people, but they're like, wow, I didn't realize how much I was missing my spouse, that we were really living a life in passing, or that how much these poor animals, like I'm going to just tell you, like our dogs have been on 10,000 walks a day. They're the most fit animals ever because people are home and we're like, oh, we should take you on a walk because you don't know how to like
engage. You're an animal and you need to walk.
Right. So it's just been so neat in this regard to watch people have to unfold to the primary responsibility of work is home, right? Like that's the job. And then the job outside of home or whatever you do to make money is actually the secondary relationship. So that has been a really interesting realignment. I think. I mean, I don't know if that's your experience, but I've definitely.
Oh, absolutely. Even in the beginning, a lot of people and my clients have said things like, it's so strange because I actually feel like, in some ways it's kind of great being at home because you realize how much you've been wasting, your life really, on distraction, on consumerism, on even just like driving, an hour to work and an hour back and trying to, wasted time, wasted money, wasted efforts. So much of the life has been about just trying to make it through the day or make it through, do something to entertain yourself or distract yourself. And that all adds up. And then once we don't have all that, I mean, believe me, I miss going out to dinners and things like that and doing some of those more fun things and planning travel. But we start to realize what is life really is more, again, that Capricorn, when we're in limitation, that growth impulse is still there. And, are there ways that we can just put down our roots so that we can, grow taller rather than spreading ourselves so thin, which is what, we've been doing. So it's been a huge awakening for a lot of people about how they lived our lives and where they've put their priorities. And so hopefully now we're able to see that again. I mean, I personally feel like we'll likely be back in quarantine for the fall and winter, with flu season, it just makes sense. So even with Jupiter direct, now the good thing is Jupiter only has a few more months in Capricorn. I will say this Jupiter in Capricorn has been a rough one, even for me at Capricorn. And I usually love Jupiter in Capricorn. But I mean, we do want to make the most of it, about where our values are. I think all of the earth signs personally have to do with where our values are, and where our priorities are. Yeah. And, because once Jupiter wraps up and goes into Aquarius, where he'll feel more free, I think we will have a sense of freedom, but in a different way, not quite like we had before. We're obviously in a new world, and we're obviously having to respond to that new world in many ways. But I think our optimism can come back if we, again, don't cling to the old way, and we can actually have self-belief. I think that's one of the things with Jupiter is when it went retrograde, we had to rely on ourselves. And ultimately our belief that we put onto others, we realize that's just a projection. We have to believe in ourselves. We have to believe that we can be part of this new world, this brave new world that we're creating, that we've actually said we wanted on some level, that we've actually moved toward, creating something different, because the old way just was too limiting and it wasn't fully expressive of ourselves individually and, as communities.
Yeah, I agree. Well, and here we are in Virgo season, where, that big old sun in Virgo is just asking over and over and over again, what's the priority? Let's go through your life with a fine-tooth comb, because this is what I'm good at. I'm good at showing you what's the priority. And when we have the Capricorn Council, and it's like, what's the priority of my resources in a material plane? Because earth signs are material, we're here and we're down in here. And I think that becomes a critical place to take advantage of all of the seasons we've been given, but especially right now, because when Jupiter does get into Aquarius, he will feel more free. If we have not figured out how to tap into some structure for our resources, I actually think that big old gust of air can be really challenging if we haven't gotten those roots down into the ground. So it's a nice it's nice at a maybe superficial level to think, yay, okay, what good things have come my way, since Jupiter is retrograde and now he's direct, what good things, and that's great. But I think more so it's like what emerged in your belief structure of how you're going to be solid going forward. Because I know for me, Capricorn, through discipline is where I get freedom. Right? When I'm all over and I got to trust somebody else for my resources, whatever they are, that is so stressful to the human experience, I think. And it is the place that I feel the least self-confident about what is going on. So it's like during the Jupiter retrograde, during Virgo season, what's the priority? And then how are you going to have that expand out so it's solid? So when Jupiter hits Aquarius and goes, are you ready? Are you ready for that? And are you still clinging to when are things going to get back to normal? That is a question I feel like is so hard for us right now.
Because it's all we know, even those of us, I think millennials and younger, I feel like they tend to, they're well positioned to, they want the next and the new and all this old stuff just needs to go away. And it's a lot of those of us that like, well, this is all I've known my whole life, but like people that still resist being on Zoom or resist, doing, I've heard of coaches and I've heard of therapists and people like that like, or don't want to do Zoom. They're just going to wait till everything is over. I'm like, it's probably a good idea to start getting comfortable on Zoom, because I've been doing it my whole time as an astrologer, pretty much. I've always done online readings and teaching and things like that. And I've always just loved it because we could connect with people from all over the world. And to me, it's just efficient. I'm Capricorn. It's like, I'll do what works. Efficient. It works. It's cheap for me. I don't have to buy a building and have an office like outside of the house. It just makes sense. My previous life was my husband and I owned an art gallery and we ran, we had like 4 to 6 shows a year. And it was so expensive to have, another building. At one time we did a build out and we lived there because, to have like the physical space and do all these shows and all this. And then we were doing art fairs, traveling. And when I think about, God, the shift from earth to air, that model, luckily we left that a number of years ago in I think 2016, but that model just doesn't seem like it really will translate as much in this shift from this earth heavy era, because this is an era we're talking about, as you probably talked about on other of your chat and choose, is the shift to air, which is I think a 200-year cycle or something like that. We're shifting from earth to air. But it just seems more and more like those people who are positioned to take advantage of, the new technology, the new way of thinking and living and being, will be a lot better positioned, can sort of ride the wave of that Jupiter in Aquarius, Jupiter, Saturn in Aquarius, than those who are resistant to it. I think what you were exactly right. For some people, it could be overwhelming because, that's an air sign. That's the sign of the mind and, the mental realm. And, I think even the higher mind, just think about the shift in consciousness that had to happen for us everyone to wear masks, everyone to stay 6 feet away from each other. This whole, stay at home all the time. A lot of people, they're still resisting it because it's just so foreign to them. It's so alien to them. Well, we need to actually sort of just mentally come to grips with what's happening in the world in order for then we can be okay enough, mentally, so we don't just totally check out, so that we can move into this new era. I think that's one of the things that really shook people, when Saturn dipped into Aquarius is when this stuff started happening. And it was really a pressure on our mental understanding of the world. I remember the first time going to the grocery store and every 5 minutes it would say on the loudspeaker, maintain a distance of 6 feet from your neighbor, from other people in the and I just felt like, am I in like a movie? It's like Gwyneth Paltrow and like Brad Pitt gonna come out and like, I mean, it was just like, it was so weird. But then I realized, this is what's so right now, however it happened or however it lasts, we just have to accept it. I know I don't want to get sick. I hate getting sick. And so just from that alone, I don't want, to make anybody else sick. Then I'll do these small, simple steps that it takes. And then that's just the new normal. I think it's so important that we get with it, kind of get with the new normal.
And it's interesting too, because next year it's a very fixed energy, right? Mm-hmm. So as the new era kind of blows in, there's a lot that's going to be grounding down, fixing down, fixed ideas, fix these kinds of things, which, the question there too becomes with Mars and Aries, who gets to decide what's the new norm for everybody, right? That's a big question to be tackling for sure. But then also this other place of the new norm is still in progress. It seems like, I think about all the mental shifts it took, because we'll have Saturn and Uranus square, throughout 2021 as well. And I think about how in countries they switched their monetary scales, that you had to have new thinking under that, right? They switched the way that they did things in their societies, and it came under fierce pressure usually to be able to do that. And that's all going to be happening under this fixed kind of, let's make these things stick kind of ideals. So it is going to be interesting and questioning why we do what we do, why you do what you do, why do you believe that, why do you vote that way, why do you take that route? All of these things are pretty critical right now, but pulling it down into our personal lives, I think too, really going back over this Jupiter retrograde, not only seeing where the mentality, maybe something's changed, maybe you've gone back overthinking or something like that, but truly, what's the gift of what you've learned and done? Because Capricorn is material. So what have you done to make something solid so that it can come forward and expand and grow out? What's the wish? What's the dream? What's the vision that you have? Jupiter has sextiled Neptune. This is a very courageous, I think, willingness to move towards a dream, even if you can't see all of the rest of everything else that's going out. And it in a new realm of thinking, right? The realm of thinking that we're coming into, your ideas that's gold. That's gold. I think it becomes so much less in Aquarius about what you have and more about what can you do? What do you do? What do you have to offer? Jupiter also says, what training do you need to be efficient, effective, or whatever, right? Yeah. So all of these things, I'm like, please just look at your gifts, create a dream and walk towards it.
Yeah, I think there's something so much more satisfying too when you create your own, reality, and you are, like you said, create your dream and walk to it and educate yourself. There's times when, and I'm sure like we're both like super busy, like doing our own thing, like running our own businesses and things. Sometimes we just want someone to just like do all the details. But when we can learn how everything works, and when we know that we are capable of, running our whole everything, then that gives you a sense of, like, within you, again, that building that faith in yourself in practical ways. And those little things, they can do so much, like you were saying, that, it gives you so much more confidence when you know that you can rely on yourself. I mean, it does something to the psyche and to, your emotional life when it's one thing to have a day where you've just wasted all the time, and just chasing after things. And it's another thing to have, a day where you actually felt, I actually got something done. Maybe not everything, but I actually got something done because I was disciplined. I was focused. I just put one foot in front of the other. Yeah. And I know I'm going somewhere, because we look at Jupiter and Sagittarius about the horizon, right? It's like, where are we aspiring to? What are we aspiring to? And if we can just take some practical steps in those directions. I mean, I had a business coach who was before she had been like a multimillionaire, like real estate guru or something. And she really firmly believed in baby steps. She said, baby steps, at least they're steps forward, right? Sometimes you need baby steps. Baby steps are okay as long as you keep taking them.
Yeah.
That to me has said, whenever I feel like it's too much, or there's too much to do, I always just tell myself, okay, baby steps are okay. Let me just take
Yeah.
some steps.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I'm just having this thought of this Jupiter Pluto really makes us quite driven to achieve whatever it is that we want to do, whatever we want to change. But the Jupiter and Neptune, I think, opens our fellows up to provide as well. And I'm just thinking about these teachers where it's like, okay, if you want to go to the next level and you want to learn, I don't know about you, but as a teacher and as a professional, these transits have definitely changed my heart and my awareness of others as well. And I'm like, oh, if you want to learn, but you can't afford it, I bet I can still figure out how to teach you. You know, there's this opening of availability that seems quite generous with that Neptunian energy for people who want it. Now, I've seen several people try to be ruthless and kind of take advantage of that with some other teachers as well. I mean, because, you know, energy's energy. We're all where we are in our evolution, but that seems to be there as well, like a willingness to, all you got to do is want to change your circumstance, whatever that is. And it seems like there are people who are open to providing the opportunity for
I
that
think
to
the
happen.
generosity, the generosity of Jupiter can really be boosted with that sextile to Neptune, and maybe even the generosity meets compassion. And in practical ways too. I mean, we've seen, like, I just had an issue with like my credit card company yesterday where like I had some big charge and I was like, oh wait, no, I don't want this charge, but it was something from, the card, like they charged a certain amount every year and it had to do with like, you get like a companion ticket or whatever, but I'm like, I'm not flying anywhere anytime soon. So I'm just going to ask them to take off this big charge. And I'm like, okay, I was like gearing for a fight. And I called and I said, I don't want this charge. And they said, okay, that's fine. We'll just take it off. You're not going to have your companion ticket. I'm like, that's fine. And it was done. And I really feel like it's because in this pandemic, maybe it's because they've received some money from a bailout that they don't have to be so ruthless. I don't know. Maybe they just changed their company policy to be more compassionate. I don't know what it is. I did feel like, if it wasn't the pandemic, this would have been, having to write letters or call and get a different, person on the phone. It wouldn't have been so easy, but I was so grateful. I was like, thank God, because like, I'm not, I don't intend to travel anytime soon. Yes, I had agreed initially to pay this amount every year, but things changed. I changed my mind. The world changed.
Right.
There's times where we can be tough and say, well, you agreed to it, blah, blah. Or we can just say, you know what? I understand, things have changed. And that getting that, just those little moments of grace, it makes you want to pass it on and it makes you want to open up to others.
Yeah. All right, man. Well, okay. So Jupiter's direct. Any final thoughts on what people can do with that, should be looking for, expect? I mean, he's going to be direct until next year. So we've got a fair amount of months to play with Jupiter before he goes retrograde again.
I say take advantage as much as you can with Jupiter in Capricorn. Capricorn loves, like you said earlier, discipline. Capricorn is entrepreneurial. Everybody now is having to reimagine their work and how they're actually going to live in those practical reality things. And we've had, several months with Jupiter retrograde to be, just rethinking, reimagining, going deep into our beliefs. And now it's time to, those big dreams, make those dreams real. And when I think of Capricorn, it's, again, it's entrepreneurial. This is a time to like make your right livelihood real in the world, realign with right livelihood, which means that, who I am, what I believe to myself to be, and what I believe the world to offer needs to be realigned. And in Capricorn, we can really take responsibility for our destiny. I think that's really the ultimate lesson with Jupiter and Capricorn. And so I think it's a time to expand, even if maybe earlier in the year you felt a lot more limited, or even have had failures. I feel like use this time, especially today, we've got Sun trine Pluto, right?
Yes.
We have the sense
So
of
good.
determination.
So
it's time
good.
to be more determined and to have more faith and to go bigger. I think it's really, there's been such a fear around, oh, the world economy is going, but when you hear that, and if that makes you want to get smaller, just realize that we are each the economy. We all have to create and earn money and spend money and make this economy work. So, I wouldn't listen to all the fear. I would start to just, see what's in front of you and what inspires you to create.
I think that those are good thoughts on how to use this thing going forward, because we're certainly each a piece of the pie here. And the more we can have that discipline and self-structure, and there are the less fingers in your life, the more power you have to do with it as you should so choose to do, right? But how do you, maybe there's a process of getting there. I know that, man, early on in life, I had so much debt. I never had a credit card, and I had so much debt. And it was like, I had a lot of voices in my life who got to have a say as to what and how and when I did things. And what that was going to require was more training on my part so that I could earn in a different way to be free of those debts and thus manage my own little world. And that is a lot of, I think, what we see here too. So that's a big question I would leave you guys with today, in what you're doing and to expand towards that dream that you have and what's next, and also be a part of society and all of the things. Where do you need to train? Where can you look at? What do you need to know in order to be self-confident enough in your world to participate without all of the fear? Those are good questions, I think, to ponder here. So, man, Christina, thanks for coming over and actually eating. You get a gold star for real food.
I still have some salmon that's getting cold on my plate, so I need to make sure I eat it as soon as we get off. But thank you so much. And I'm so looking forward to your training on YouTube and how to have a YouTube channel, because that is one thing where I've been hitting a wall. And so I'll be on that. So I can't wait to hear all about that. And if anybody wants to find me, they can find me on Radiant Astrology on YouTube and radiantastrology.com online.
Awesome. And I will make sure all of those links are underneath this video once it gets posted up there, so you guys can find Christina. And if you haven't gone over to check out all of the things she's doing and talking about, all the Jungian work you do is really just lovely. So if that's something you feel any way attracted to, Miss Christina is your lady. So we will see you guys. When will we see you guys? We'll see you just tomorrow for Gary Caton being here. We're going to get you ready for Mercury retrograde between Scorpio and Libra. That is coming up just next month. All right, you guys have a great day, and we'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.